Greetings, everybody! Welcome! It is I, Cantus Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire. And today, I'm revisiting something I haven't talked about in a while, or done anything with in a while. Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness. For those of you who have been around on both my Twitch and YouTube channel, on Twitch side, maybe even watched Legacies of Caine. Perhaps on my YouTube side, you've seen many of my Vampire the Masquerade videos. It's a topic that I'm also very interested in, but dives in the depths of a lot of interesting subject overall. So that's kind of where we're going to come in today. Today is all about the cosmology of the World of Darkness, which comes from a lot of different directions. So it's going to be a complex mess to talk about. But because I'm taking it from the direction of Vampire the Masquerade, we are going to focus on Caine, the father of vampires, the pseudo-biblical figure, and that kind of connection there, and talk about that's existence as it relates to everything else. That's kind of where we're going to hit all this. So if you're interested in Caine and learning a little bit more, I'm not going to go into the full details of Caine's existence, but many years ago I did a video on Caine. I'm going to throw the link in the description here for those of you who are watching live on Twitch. And those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'm hopefully going to put this up like in a video link here. Future me, remember, please, video link for, people of my Caine video. So that they can also click on something. So everybody can click. I recommend, after all is said and done, go check out and learn a little bit more about Caine himself. But we do have to talk Caine, because Caine as a figure is very interesting, because it relates to... We'll start with the vampire's view of the World of Darkness and its origins, because the vampires are still varied, because there are technically multiple types of vampires that exist throughout the world, so we're going to kind of talk about that too and how it relates together. But the one that's most dominant, of course, is the Western version, the European/Middle Eastern version, which is the Nodism, the kind of religion of the vampires, and Caine himself. This kind of origins, and you think why it's the most dominant? Well, yes, there were vampires throughout the world. Guess what? When Europeans, the culture which has ended up being a very huge influence across the world, conquered a lot of the world and did a lot of horrible crap, their vampires went with them. And their vampires dominated with them. It turns out, when you have a dominant culture, your supernatural beings also dominate with you. It just happens. So the short story of Caine, just to kind of give a basic of it, is the story of Cain and Abel from the Bible. He's the guy who killed Abel. That's it. Like, the entire thing is cursed by God to be a vampire. That's the short term of it. But that, then you're getting into angels and God and, a lot of things there. The thing about Caine that can be confirmed, sort of, is that he existed? See, that's the question. The closest beings who confirm Caine's existence are those of the third generation, traditionally called the Antediluvians, but that's just the term for those that were around during the Caine time. There are other people that have either become or, diablerized third generations and stuff. So, third generation is the most powerful generation of vampire that can be found. There are plenty of third generations that are out there, honestly. You can find those that exist, such as, like, Tremere. Tremere is a third generation that you can just run into. But technically not. Tremere's kind of dead, kind of not. But if you were part of the Tremere clan, there was a possibility, at least until more recent times, you could go meet with Tremere. Your third generation existed in some kind of way. And there are third generations who have been alive and woken up. Ravnos, the third generation of the Ravnos clan, awoke, and there was a big event that was related to it. and proved why antediluvians were really powerful and strong, because guess what? When you have, like, in comparison to Tremere, who was pretty powerful, when you got 8,000 years of more of training, honestly, you can master your powers a lot more. So, you know. And then, of course, you've got, like, a good example of something that's a little more out there is, I used it during Legacies of Caine, Arakel. Arakel, the Toreador antediluvian, kind of just exists. She doesn't sleep the same as a lot of the other ones, which there could be a lot of reasoning behind, but basically a lot of ancient vampires go into torpor more. You could probably find her, honestly, if you really wanted to. You know, she was doing art. She's residing in Greece doing art. Because that's what she does. The Toreador are artists. Probably keeps her, like, you know, a little bit more human and a little more sane than your average vampire. So, these are people, beings, who say, oh yeah, Caine is real. Met the dude. You know, I understand the dude. And, you know, the thing is, though, they bring their stories from Caine as this god king of the city, of the original Enoch, the first city, and, of course, the second city. It was this being of, like, our creator 2 generations ago. So, honestly, the 3rd generation revered Caine. That's the thing about you have to think about. Also, beyond that, they didn't have as much direct contact, most of them, and the ones you can talk to, again, here's another thing, is ancient vampires could just lie because they want to. Now, granted, they're probably not going to all share the same story, but honestly, they might just keep with the story of the 4. So it's this weird thing of, there's this figure Caine, which most likely existed, but the level of existence and what it meant and where this thing that was the first vampire came from could be debated. Whether or not it is directly related into the biblical connections or not, you get into some, like, problems there, and that's where you get into Nodism, which is the, you know, the land of Nod, a place east of Eden, basically. That's what it is. It's the place that Caine was banished to, from murdering Abel. So that's the idea of Nodism, as a point. So, we can talk for a minute about Nodism, because we should, before we get back to the more secular stuff, the more religious rather than more secular kind of stuff there. And there are a bunch of books that are from ancient days. But much like these books that have been written down, because they are written down not by the original people, they could have a spin on them. It's one of those things that, not to get political about, or, like, I guess, controversial. Just saying, those people that, you know, like, I'm always for formative of, regardless of the book, even if it's a religious text, you take it for the grain of salt of the stories that it is, and the lessons that it teaches, rather than the exact words, because the exact words were oftentimes copied down by mortal people much after the time that things occurred, meaning it could be swayed by the person's writing, and honestly, there could be mistakes. You know, when information is copied down after time. And so the Book of Nod, the Ulysses of Sanctities, the Lilian, and the Luciferian, the 4 books that cover Caine's history, similar to many other holy texts and stuff like that out there, could have been influenced by history and stuff like that. You know, that's just one of those things about, you know, trusting history and trusting the ways that you go. Anyway, Nodism. We talk about the Nodism. You know, there's 2 big paths. There's the Sabbat's path of Nodism. the path of Caine, the path of enlightenment. And there's a Gehenna cult, and the secular. So basically, Sabbat is very religious Nodist. That's the one thing you have to think about the Sabbat is the way that they act. They are very religious in their mannerisms. So they are big on the idea that they are an agency for Caine to work his will in the final nights. Basically the end of the world kind of thing. And that has a very heavy tone within the Sabbat. The Sabbat is always looked on as, if you're talking Vampire the Masquerade, kind of the villains, because they take things to a very extreme, but they take those beliefs and teachings that they believe came down from Caine in a very extreme way. They are religious extremists. It doesn't mean that there aren't other people that look at Caine in a very religious manner, it's just the Sabbat are the other ones. There are secular Nodists. There are those among the Camarilla. They accept chunks of the Caine's Mist, but they don't have the same kind of religious terms to it, you know? And that's the kind of thing, is trying to find that balance between everything. And so, that's the thing. Trying to find the balance between all of this, and it's in the Vampire the World's sort of religious connotations is hard. It really is. But, as I said, there are a bunch of books which kind of talk about all these different things. You can find actual physical copies of the Book of Nod, the Reseer and Fankless, the Lillian, and I'm not sure about the Luciferian because I think that's from it might be, okay, so it's within Days of Fire has a copy of it within it, which is from Demon the Fallen. So, if you accept Caine at face value, you then are accepting that there is a god figure in the world of darkness. And so that's where the Vampire the Masquerade kind of belief oftentimes comes in here, that there is a, effectively, I believe it's the term is Abrahamic deity, a monotheistic deity. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't other beliefs, too. Before we kind of dive into the deep here, I do want to mention two other major groups, the Quaijin and the Libans of Africa. In a similar thing, the groups of vampires within India that come from the Ravnos, but they do have kind of connections more with Middle East, because the Ravnos clan is supposed to have come from there, originally. And, yeah, there's a lot of influence from the Quaijin and the Ravnos coming from the west, and so the exact origin of stuff within India is kind of like on the border there. But the Libans of Africa, within the Libans, which are the African vampires, they have an ancient history. And many of them acquire their stories of their origins to various African gods and legends. And it's very different than the Nodists. There is a very similar character to Caine within the Liban, Cognin. So there are some similarities there. So it's not like there couldn't be a Caine figure also that exactly exists. It could be, it connects together also. But the problem then lies that, again, the Libans are very distinct. So as soon as you get into that, you're already breaking apart some of the storylines. And the Quaijin have their own stories. But the thing about the Quaijin, though, is they are believed to be corrupted descendants of the Wan... I'm going to butcher some of these words. The Wan Xian, the 10,000 heroes chosen by the august personage of Jade, which kind of then a lot of more, you know, it can be kind of equivalated to basically a monotheistic deity kind of thing about one being ahead of everything. Yeah. So it becomes complex. That thing is Caine. Some of the old Cainites call the Caine basically humans, the children of Seth, because Seth was supposed to be the third brother. There's a bunch of stuff on prehistory. We should definitely talk how the World of Darkness looks at, if you are using the actual religious connections, the monotheistic God. And again, the thing about this is, this figure is looked at in World of Darkness as it's like, not that there isn't one, kind of, there could be one. There, like, the way they talk about it is like that thing of like legends and stuff, and they hint at stuff about existing, but the way they also take about it, they take about it that it's a lot less this religion's right, more like there is a being and various religions interpret the being in their own way, kind of thing. So, and we will talk about werewolf, because werewolf ignores a lot of this, goes a very different direction. But if we talk about, you know, vampire, when we talk about Western vampires, the main ones, hey, Cain and Abel, right there in things. And the thing is, there is an entire thing called Demon the Fallen. It is a game set in the entire world, and, they bring about things like Lucifer and the Fall and kind of stuff like that. Demons believe God exists. They say they knew God, and their interpretations complex love-hate relationship by their torment. And the thing is, what they say is demons knew God. Where goes that? They don't know what God is doing now. So that's an important thing to bring in here too, because Demon the Fallen kind of relates very heavily to Vampire the Masquerade in this one point here. And as I said, the Quaidgen believe the August of personage of Jade turned his face on them, cursing them, basically turning them from these heroes into what they are. So the Wankai believe in a god. It's not just a forgiving god, It's like a weird thing of, they have a version of this, but it's different because it's much more Eastern. Of course, we bring in hunters then, who are imbued by agencies called the messengers. The thing about the messengers is they're beings of power. Whether that means they are powerful spirits, if you're talking about werewolves, if you're talking about, more vampire and demons, that they're like angels, the hunters don't know. And there's plenty of them that do believe, because of, religious influence, and a lot of the more Judeo-Christian religions are the main ones in the world, that they are messengers of God. So it becomes complex in Hunter the Reckoning. And in their kind of idea is sort of like they're given this ability because, God has largely left the fallen world. And they're basically what was given abilities to patch up the problems. That's kind of a lot of times where the more religious hunters, when we're coming into origin stories, they would go more into like, actual religious stuff and be like, when they talk about it, like, things went to shit, kind of been abandoned. We're here to basically, clean up the shit. God. Let's talk werewolves for a second before we go into mages, which is another headache. And of course, we'll finish up with a bit of Wraith and a little bit more Demon in there, too. So werewolves, it's correct. It's very animalism in a way. But the thing about werewolves, because they are big on spirits, and they have an origin story, there was the Triad, basically are the major deities of them, and Gaia, which is the spirit of, like, the, it's the spirit above the Celestians, and the Triad is, like, above there, so it's the Triad, and then, below that, is Gaia and stuff like that, and then they have the Celestines, which a Celestine is kind of like akin in werewolf to an angel. They're a very high, powerful spirit. Two main Celestines are Luna, who represents the moon, and Helios, that represents the sun. So, if you would ask a werewolf, what they would believe in, because there are the Theurges, who are god workers among the Garou, who teach theology of the Triad and Gaia as major deities. They concede that the god of the Abrahamic religions, of the Judeo-Christian religions, is they kind of are like, oh, that's another very powerful Celestine that's influenced, mortal lives, human lives, which has nothing to do with us. So that's kind of where they go at things. They're like, we are things created more from more primal spirits. This spirit, which basically looks over, have spirits. Thank you. Thank you for the... I'm not good at, interpreting that part of it. So, but it doesn't mean that there is others that kind of, have other weird ideas. Like, the Beset creation myth includes Ahu, the creator of the Triad, who in turn created Gaia. Which is like... So the Beset actually have a higher being that created the Triad. Basically, their idea is there was something that created these three things, which then created the universe, which then created the spirit of the earth. Kind of a weird kind of thing, because the Triad end up being the creators of... it's the balance between creation, order, and entropy is kind of the... or the wild, the weaver, and the worm, or what it is. It's dynamic, pattern, primordial, almost. So that's kind of how you have to see these three essences of the Triad. They're, again, they break down the essences of the universe itself. And so, yeah. So, werewolves have a complex look, but not all changing breeds. As we said, the Beset have a very view that could be connected up with some of the vampire views. Mages, on the other hand, they, yeah. There are many that have some kind of faith in a, religion. There's a group, the Celestial Chorus, that's based on it. The thing about mages, though, is they see that if there is such a being, it's not it's ineffable, and ultimately incomprehensible outside the Ascension. So it's basically, their idea is, if there was something that sparked off existence, it's beyond our entire thing, and to, connect up with, and, you would have to go down the path of Ascension if you actually want to even understand this entire thing. Which is, that's getting into the entire idea of Mage's entire thing. It's a reason it's called Mage the Ascension. The Ascension is basically... It's the thing that Mage is trying to, you're trying to reach it, and it's the end of your character, kind of. It's, you get ultimate power over reality, transcending the bonds of your earthly limits. You think about Ascension as almost like, for a mage, they're thinking it as we're connecting up with the energies of the universe, and we're ascending to something of a higher plane of being. So there can be heavy, religious connotations related to that for those of that have that, a religion of some kind, and believe in that. So they have this connection up to the, creators and stuff. So you can see, I've kind of ran down into the idea of, divinity, almost, when I'm talking about the creation of the world of darkness, because the reason we have to hit on that, and, the most least religious version of all of this stuff kind of is the werewolf one. I think the thing about it is you have to see that all supernatural beings, because they have abilities that go beyond the normal scope of the world as we know it, and have abilities that manipulate the causality of the world, they look into a world that is much more spiritual in a way. And so you have to hit on that spiritualness and a belief in, the powers of the universe. Whether how you interpret that is up to individuals, And I think that's what it comes down to, because of the nature of all the beings in this world, kind of thing. So yeah, mages, they interpret whatever, their tradition kind of determines how they interpret the nature of the god they would look at, and kind of move through that, It's an entire mess of a thing, honestly. And, so, wraiths, we're not going to really get into too much. They're kind of spirits of the dead. I mean, that's the easiest way of saying it. And similarly, the demon, the fallen, they're like, oh, we knew him personally, and they were cast in the Abyss, which we've talked about the Abyss in Legacies of Caine, because the Abyss is connected to the Sombra. Yeah. And the Sixth Great Maelstrom had their release from the Abyss, which was a major event in the, basically, Land of the Dead. And then they've got now factions based on their attitude towards humanity and God and stuff like that. So they've kind of broken apart. I think it's, let me just check the list here. The Reconcilers, the Raveners, the Cryptics, the Faustians, and Luciferians. So, yeah. And so, the thing is then, demons are a thing, say it, but again, you have to point the point in time here is you can interpret this in many different ways. You could be very religious about the interpretations of these kind of creations. You could also hit it on a much different direction because, honestly, even the demons, before they were fallen, when they were more like angels, revered the thing that created them and probably didn't ask questions. Because they started asking questions, they became the fallen. You see? So that's why there's this entire thing of... It's the same with Caine. You can ask questions, but you're not really going to get answers. And the people you can actually ask questions to look at that character in such a way that reinforces a lot of just belief, and in a world where belief does matter, but also there's it's our world, so it's a combination of belief and reality. It becomes a really hard thing, especially taking our world and overlaying it with supernatural stuff that's known to exist. It just changes things and makes it a confuddled mess. Yes. So, certainly, there isn't the Fallen have their own kind of main creation kind of thing, and so you can kind of look at the demons for their story, which is in fact quite different than what you would go in through the Bible and a lot of religious texts. It does have some of the same main beats. That's the thing is, Lucifer, of course, led his rebellion, fell, kind of thing. That kind of stuff with the fall, the Age of Wrath, and a lot of these other things that heard. They have an entire history that could be looked into. Farah, they're basically the changing breeds, they kind of actually believe in something a little bit more, honestly, weirdly enough, scientific. Because most Farah, though they have this spiritual nature and assume that there's a lot of spirits, and spirits helped create the universe, they assume that the Big Bang was basically the culmination of the Weaver, the Worm, and the Wild beginning things. They combined their powers that created the universe, kind of thing. So they go on this with like, oh yes, spirits were behind it, but it's the thing that, people talk about in science, which is a very weird kind of thing to think about, that some people that, like, are very spiritual aspire to it. That's one of those interesting things about werewolves, is they look at things in a weird way that ends up being a lot less based on beliefs in the way that we think about it for a lot of our human people and a lot of sets of beliefs we have, but they also have a lot more and a lot more deeper beliefs. And honestly, they are reassured by these beliefs because they can do things like travel to the Umbra and actually talk with spirits. So, I mean, like, there are spirits and the Umbra, and they exist, but what are they in the grand scheme of the cosmology? That's something that's really hard to understand. We're talking about, like, these combinations of cosmologies in a weird way that everybody's looking at it in a different way, and it's one of those things is there might be some kind of common thing there or something, and so there is an entire, like, prehistory you could look at of, like, millions of years and the creation of Earth and spirits and stuff, and a lot of the stuff that happened up until, the time period of the Garrow and stuff, and there's an assertable timeline of stuff, so, Now, there are a couple of stories, or kind of theories that are out there, that exist. And they're used, these two different ideas are technically used to kind of explain things. And they are presented by actual characters in a way. Well, one of them is provided by in one of the books, and the other one is presented by the main writer, one of the main writers of the Mage of the Extension books. So that one's a little less canon, because by a person, one of a real person talking about it, but they present it in a way that they believe, because it's using the information that they have from all the writing they've done in Mage of the Ascension. So both of these theories can kind of work, but there are things out there that maybe explain a lot of this. The Fallen explain things through resonance, which is there's remnants of multiple levels of creation, and kind of like their combination together kind of creates this thing. Is the multi-existence was shattered during the Age of Wrath, and so when that happened, lingering pieces kind of fell into the main creation kind of thing from these other universes that have created these, other things. That's Demon the Fallen's about. It's like, oh, this crazy shit we can't explain through our beliefs and our knowledge. How do we explain it? Oh, the God we understand and believe in, that created us, had multiple other creations, and when got pissed off at us, and threw the demons down, it explains all the crap that happened. That's demons. And also the angels, as they are in World of Darkness, explain that. Because guess what? Because there's demons, there's angels too in World of Darkness. So it's the same kind of thing. And so, I mean, you could definitely use one of those in a Fallen game if you were going to do a Demon the Fallen game. So, the one that Malcolm Shepard suggested, who was, again, longtime writer of Mage of the Ascension books, was a fractured cosmos idea, which was an interesting idea that I wanted to bring here, though it's kind of weird, but again, it's one of those other ones that might explain things that it's sort of like there are multiple bubbles of reality that are connected and overlapped, so that you might wander between these realities without understanding it, and each of these realities has slightly different constitutes of the World of Darkness. Almost think about like a the World of Darkness is a Venn diagram of universes that are connected. So kind of as you wander around, you might enter into different universes, and each of those Venn diagrams is a different set of World of Darkness stuff and has kind of separate rules. That sounds weird, but it's an interesting idea. And they say like things like the Awakening of Ravenous in 1999 caused a ripple that affected all the realities. You know, the things like that is the possibility of like the apocalypse, you know, and Gehenna for vampires, apocalypse for werewolves, etc., 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 has effects on everything. And sort of like, they say like a vampire that wanders into one of these other things doesn't realize they would kind of change in these worlds, but they'd be exactly the same. So sort of like if you entered into like the werewolf version of things, you'd be a servant of the worm. You don't know that. If you wandered into the changeling kind of things, you might be descended from ancient redcaps. You wouldn't know that kind of thing. But you kind of change your nature of your existence without knowing you changed the nature of your existence, but your existence remains the same, is the kind of idea about it. Which is an interesting idea. It sort of helps, but again, you know, this entire thing is just crazy. And, it's one of those things, it's used to explain something that did happen. So, if you've ever knew, there is in fact, a Werewolf, the Wild West game. So, if you've seen it, like there's, like Victorian Age vampire, Dark Ages vampire, like Dark Ages mage, stuff like that. But Garou, the werewolves, had the Wild West. The thing is, there was the Under a Hollowed Moon series that exists. I might be able to let me just see if I can find a quick picture of the Under the Hollowed Moon here, if Google would load up quickly. But as before I talk about it, like I'll explain what it is. Some Garou discovered the weird west of the Deadlands. Deadlands is a different role-playing game system. Oh, what was it called? Under a Hollowed Moon. Let's see if I can find this. I need it to be exactly Under a Hollowed Moon, so let's put this in quotations, because it's trying to find me everything else, because, you know, I can't find a copy of this information off the top of my head. Unfortunately. Oh, Harrowed Moon. That's why I got it wrong. Harrowed Moon. Yeah, I got it wrong. You know. It was a crossover between Deadlands and Werewolf Wild West. Let's pop this image up here. Is that the right one? Oh yeah, there it is. That's perfect. So, yeah, there it is. A crossover between these two things. Think about that. They had a crossover between these two game systems that were very weirdly different. You know, this is a thing that they did that becomes, the Deadlands becomes a canon thing in Werewolf the Apocalypse then, because Werewolf the Apocalypse, the Wild Savage West, is a prequel to it, technically. So yeah, this does give some credence to this kind of theory by one of the writers. I call it like a fan theory, but it's one of the writers of that gives this kind of theory. But again, like, it's hard to explain all of this stuff. It's just a mess of cosmologies. And like, again, if I'm playing in Caine, in Kindred of the East, I have a very different worldview than somebody from the West, from like a normal traditional Vampire the Masquerade. And the thing is, Vampire the Masquerade, certainly I could be like, you could just be like, oh yeah, there was this being, Caine. They equate him to the biblical Caine. It's probably somebody else, you know. Probably just this being that got connected together with it. We're just some dudes. You could just have a belief that's kind of religiously contained completely, that you're just like, supernatural stuff exists. That's fine. But, like, again, wherever you are in the world could also shape that, too. It's this interesting thing, and, like, also how old you are as a vampire might shape your beliefs, too. Certainly, if you're coming from the Middle Ages, the Middle Ages was heavily religious. If you're more modern day, the modern day world is a lot less hits on the belief system. So it's kind of like a mess. Beckett, who I used in Legacies of Caine, interprets the Caine mythology as a conflict between farmer and hunter tribes. That's how he interprets it. Beckett's one of those secular naudists that understands there was like a conflict and something happened to one of them that they gained supernatural powers. What the origin of these things is, they don't try to explain the origin of these things as much, you know? There's just like this entire concepts between everything that make it very hard to interpret everything. And I think that's the important thing that you're going to have to look at, is when you play in the world of darkness, whatever you are, whether you're vampire, you're mage, werewolf, or any of the other ones, you have to look at, first off, what is the general belief of the people I'm a member of. You're a werewolf, honestly speaking, you're probably going to hit more into the Triad and stuff, and Gaia, and the Celestines. And, you know, if you were raised human and then became a werewolf, you could have been religious and then have your beliefs. It's like, oh, hey, yeah, you know, understand it, evolve your beliefs. You can be religious, you can be non-religious. Same with vampires. You know, you make an actual character. And again, it's one of those things I think players sometimes forget, is if you make a player from an age, you're going to reflect an age a lot more. It's sort of like playing a werewolf and a mage nowadays. Well, that's a lot different. Again, the world still is religious, but a lot less. You know, especially, okay, depends on where you are coming from the world. If you're coming from America, America does have a big religious group, but there's not as many of it. You know, there are still plenty of people, but there's a very good chance that you're someone that has familiarity with religion, but maybe is not deep into it. If you're becoming a werewolf or a mage, honestly, that could shatter your worldview a little bit more. If you become a vampire, you might kind of assign to what, like Beckett says, like the secular naudists about anything. You know, you're like, okay, secular naudism, you know, that kind of explains it. There's the religious thing. It's the same thing with a lot of cultures. If I'm becoming a werewolf, you'd learn that actual spirits exist in the world too. You know, there are higher beings that exist. Gotta shatter your word. And again, like, the idea of mages, where they're trying to ascend to a higher plane of being, where a lot of mages believe there is higher beings out there, and just that they don't connect with the world that the same thing does, because, you know, the idea of ascension, they have to believe there are higher beings, because you're trying to ascend to a higher being. So there's this entire connotation there, and what happens when you come from that opposite direction? And it's like, you understanding the cosmology of the world is one thing, because there is no real cosmology in the world of darkness, is the easiest way to say it. There's a bunch of different people that have a bunch of different beliefs, and these bunch of different beliefs are written down. And when you combine human beliefs with the beliefs of whatever supernatural being you are, you come to what beliefs your character will have on how the universe was created and how the universe affects. There is, however, always going to be a degree of something more out there, because supernatural powers. It's sort of like, it's one of those acceptable things. It's like, if you think about a lot of fantasy-based games, especially things like D&D and Pathfinder, they often have pantheons of deities and stuff, and divine beings exist out there, and they have effects, but they're more fallible, certainly. The thing is, that's coming at a very different direction, and it's coming at a direction that's made to be putting a lot less important on, you know, the fact that there are deities out there. Making them more like the, you know, Norse gods, or the Greek gods, the Roman gods. There's a reason behind that, and I understand that reason. If you talk about it here, because it is a modern day game, you have to look things at a modern sensibility. And modern sensibility is, we are a mixed group of people, some that still pertain to beliefs, some that are kind of in the middle that don't really define their beliefs the same way, and some that are very, you know, anti-beliefs. And there's a large variety of people. So, talking about all this kind of hints at you, and really the reason behind talking about this is not to like, this is how the vampire world was created, this is how the werewolf world was created, this is how the mage, the ascension world was created. Going into this entire rant is mainly going to be based telling you, hey, there are belief systems, and powerful belief systems connected up with the fact that you might be that you're playing a supernatural being, a being with powers that go beyond normal humanity, go beyond things like this. You don't have an explanation for this, because there isn't an explanation that's, you know, based on a scientific world. You know, it's based in a world of spiritualism and belief, to a degree. You're an immortal vampire that can control shadows in people's minds. You know, some of you can change into animals. Some of you can do all the kinds of crazy, weird stuff. You don't... It's a good way of interpreting what the hell are vampires going to believe for their existence, from knowing they have these abilities. Because there's no way to explain it. Some of them can enter the land of the dead, manipulate souls of the dead, summon zombies or spirits to their aid. That's a thing some of them can do. You know? That just blows stuff out of the water. And it just changes the dynamic of your understanding of the universe. Like, again, same for werewolf. You can communicate with spiritual entities. Things that are representative of various aspects of nature. You have connection with them. What the hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean with combining with all this other stuff that's out there? How do you explain them all? And I think that's the thing is, like, there isn't a good explanation for all of them together, and that's where the combined kind of parallel universe thing actually has some merit there. The, fractured cosmos idea. That helps in an explanation like this. But again, that's just one writer's interpretation of all this. You can interpret all of it however you want. You don't need to actually even get into this kind of stuff in your game if you're running it. I've got to be honest. Unless your storyline really calls for it, I wouldn't recommend it. I used Caine as a character in my game. Guess what I didn't do? I didn't go that step farther. You know, there is a step farther about using what is like history in these worlds, or supposed history, and then using the more deeper belief kind of stuff. And I didn't take that final step because I kept it easier. And I didn't have to make certain decisions on how my cosmology worked. Because, honestly speaking, I didn't know. I'm using the full world of darkness. How do I combine werewolves, vampires, and mages? An easy way to do that sometimes is to not. If you want to make a very simple cosmology, don't. Guess what? If I'm just using vampires, and the other ones are mentioned in passing, and I don't really dive deep into anything about them, you know, oh, there's werewolves over there. Oh, yeah, there's mages over there. Oh, yeah, there's demons over there. I could very easily just keep it as the vampire story, you know, which has some connotations into, like, various things, but, again, it's very interesting because as all of the other worlds and stuff, like a lot of these other RPGs, Arthur Time, there are other worlds, other universes, it's very easy to explain their universes there because there's something that's made up. In a world which is ours, it becomes more difficult. Shadowrun keeps things simple. It's an energy that's part of the universe. Whether or not there is because there are actual religious people in Shadowrun still too. They've interpreted things differently and begun to understand stuff. Hey, all these different things. They have interpretations and stuff that you can look up to understand how, people that believe in the various origins of the universe in there, because they're a version of our universe, an alternate world version of it. It's just that they include this magical energy which does stuff, and it's the explanation for a lot of stuff. It makes it simple. Scientific people can explain it for their scientific reasons. Faithful people can explain it for their faithful ways. Same kind of our world now. There are people that explain things. Oh, that's science. Oh, that's faith. And arguments over it. That happens. Looking to science as finding faith is also not a thing that some people that do. World of Darkness just becomes a muddled mess. And so, it's our world. It's a muddled mess. More than our world is. Remember that. I think that's a good thing I can say about it. So yeah. Again, if you want to check out Caine, I put the link in the Twitch chat. I threw it up. I hopefully remember to throw it up over there for you linking to the video to learn a little more about Caine's history. I will talk more about some of this history. I'll go beyond this point here. I think the next thing I will talk about is the first city of vampires. I might also talk about some of these other sects and their deep history, where it actually is history beyond the cosmology of it all. When we get into history, when we get into werewolf and the Pharaoh's history, mage's history, and all these things, where we can kind of hint at these different stories and where the stories become less you have to have belief, more there's a core of belief, but there's interpretations which can go on different levels. Because again, as soon as you hit Caine, this mythical figure, there's the Book of Nod, the Rearstern Fragments, the Lilianian, the Luciferians, kind of these ancient histories that kind of talk about him, as Caine kills Abel. But there's also interpretations that are exist beyond that. Anyway, we only talked about an hour today, but I think it was a very productive hour, because this is a very interesting topic to get into. It's the kind of topic that honestly be interesting to speak to how something like a theologian would interpret a lot of this stuff and things like this. Someone that has a very heavy religious background, much more than I do, would interpret a lot of this stuff and look at a lot of things. Because it's an interesting way that they take a lot of stuff. So. Yeah. Might be interesting to have a discussion on this again at some point in time. But I've gone over the basic ideas of it. That actually might be a more discussing tabletop topic of religion in your game world. Because honestly, that is a thing that is something to discuss sometimes. Because it can be passed off as something relatively simple. I've got to admit, I like something like Pathfinder, pass it off very simple. But in a terms of something like Shadowrun, kind of I tend to similarly only use it as when it's needed, kind of thing, when a storyline needs it, because it's a world that's very science heavy, but it does have this mysticism about it. The thing is, the mysticism is very different than again, there are very religious people, but the thing is think about this. the entire shaman movement is based off of Native American beliefs. Hermetic mages are based off of, like, European wizard beliefs. These are very different than, like, religious kind of beliefs when it comes to magic. Those exist, though. They are not one of the major factions, though, because these are the two factions that came up first. Shamans for rediscovering magic first, and Hermetic because they were scientists who basically wanted to go and who found out, oh, hey, magic exists, let's study scientifically. And so that's kind of like an interesting dynamic that came up with here. Anyway, I'm digressing too much into other stuff right now. For now, let's call it here. I hope you learned a couple things or two about the nature of the world of darkness and how it is honestly chaotic, and it's similar to our world where it's a lot of different religions with a lot of different creation myths. Some of them are similar to each other. Hey, the world of darkness. There's a lot of different belief systems with a lot of different creation myths, some of which are similar, some of which can overlap each other. Turns out, it's a lot like our world. There's just, again, that moniker of something different about the beings of the supernatural world because they are supernatural in the world of darkness. They are beyond normal nature. They have to explain something with their beliefs. Their beliefs are more important that way. Whatever those beliefs form it. So, keep that in mind when you're driving into a World of Darkness game, and even Vampire the Masquerade. How much do you believe about the, creation myths of the vampire people? How much have you learned about it? Do you even care about it? Do you just, even care about the origin of, like, supernatural powers? This thing, it was always here. What's the attitude of your character? Because that's the thing that can greatly affect your character. And what's the attitude of the NPCs you have, the world you have? How are you looking at the world of darkness when you interpret a lot of this? It's always an interesting way to look at it. So, I will be back Tuesdays, Thursdays. More tabletop talk. Remember, if you want to see live play, currently, Wednesdays in the evening. I'm discussing tabletop on Saturdays. These are the main tabletop-related things for those of you who are interested in it. And I do other streaming on Twitch. Remember to check that out and all my other links. Hey, everybody who enjoyed this on Twitch, thank you for joining me. If you're watching this on YouTube, remember, like, video, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Support the channels, both of them. And we'll have more of these topics here, which are very interesting deep dives into a world and how to think about it. So, farewell, everybody. Have a good one.